Model my life on Mars.
Okay. I know that there is just a few of us and that more will probably be joining us as the time passes, but my name is Jackie Bryant and I am the principal at IVA, and it is my great honor to kick off our night, the night when the rover landed on Mars, which is super exciting, and a night when we get our second installment of Dr. Doreen Mcgee's talk about, well, it's a parent academy. So I just want to say before I pass it off to Judy so you can do the proper introductions, that I love parent academies because they come from questions that we all wonder and want to explore and learn more in order to raise our kids well. And so thank you, Doreen, for this second night, especially the topic of improving emotional regulation. I feel like I want this for myself, and then maybe I can do well with my own children if I continue to grow in it. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Judy to introduce, but first I have to say, Judy is a parent of a student at IVA, and this is Ella. And Ella is one of our spring 2021 leaders figuring out how to welcome new students to the school. So Ella is like a real leader. So Judy, I'm glad that you're introducing so I can just like cheers to Ella on this evening. Pass to you.
Thank you. I'm so proud of Ella. First of all, since we're meeting her, I'm so proud of her. I tried to get her to introduce, but she's, holding her talents. So I'm doing a little bit more of a casual introduction tonight. I'm not reading, but I wanted to, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Doreen Dodgy Mcgee. She has been my sister-in-law for 25 plus years. So so really that's all I need to say. No, I'm kidding. So she, above that, is she has her doctorate in psychology and has spent a long time really passionately diving into what it means to live an embodied and present and connected life. And that has come just so to the focus after we've been able to try to figure out this last year. And so she is the author of Devised, which focuses on how to have a relationship with technology that's still healthy. And she is an amazing mother, daughter, sister, auntie, friend, and I'm so excited to also be able to announce this just in as of yesterday. She just signed a new book deal that's going to focus on re-entering into the world in an embodied way after post-pandemic and what the relationship with technology in the world and connectivity is going to be. So
oh my gosh,
let her take it from there.
We need that so bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really, really beautiful to be with you all again. And I do love tonight's focus. It's probably one of my favorite things to talk about for sure. We have to talk about emotional regulation right now, and we have to talk about it in the context of technology because they have become deeply, deeply, deeply intertwined and knit together. So I just want to do the 2 second, well, it's going to be more than 2 seconds. I'm going to try to get out of hyperbole mode right now. But I'm going to do a very short kind of recap of what we talked about last time. And basically, we talked about the fact that the research is really clear that technology is correlated with, and in many cases causes, really profound changes in our brains, in our relationship with other people interpersonally, with our own relationship with our sense of self and the way that we either do or do not have the kind of relationship with ourselves where we can have good emotional regulation. And then finally, it is deeply affecting the way in which we live or do not live within our skin. So this sense of embodiment. And I do want to tell you that in the last since in the last month, since I spoke with you all before, I've done a couple different research circles with high school students and university age students. And the two huge things that bubbled up to the surface in those circles were that people are feeling exhausted and highly, highly irritable. And I don't know if any of you can relate to that. If you can, give me a sign, but that there is just a level of exhaustion that comes with as much kind of being at home, absent our normal coping skills and refilling places, we're stuck, while at the same time really being reliant upon these devices that have a profound effect. Even if all we did was just have to sit and look at them, they would still have a profound effect on our brain and relationships and sense of self. But the fact that we are reliant upon them for our education, for our entertainment, for our vocational tasks, for even, any kind of information gathering, makes that even more intense. So I want to start by saying there is no shame. I am not intending to throw any shade tonight, and no shame. We are all doing the best we can in an impossible time. And this time in particular is especially difficult for parents. It's especially difficult for children. And so probably more than likely you as a parent are quote unquote, allowing more screen time than you ever have. You're probably also engaging with screens more than you personally ever have. And so when I'm talking tonight about excessive technology use, please understand that I know that right now, that's all of us. It's all of us. And so some of the things that I'm going to be saying are aspirational as we dial back from our tech dependence and are able to enter embodied connection. Another thing that I want to start by saying, emotional regulation and the ability to focus, which are our two big focal points for tonight, are largely learned by children by watching their parents. And not only their parents, but also the other important grown people in their lives and their teachers. So person who excels in regulating your emotions or in being able to focus, your children are going to have a harder time and are going to show more difficulties in those two areas. So tonight is more than any other night, we're going to be talking about this dual process about how do we help your children have better focus and better emotional regulation, but that starts with you being able to focus and regulate better. And we know that all of us, every person who is connected to technology in any kind of robust way, which just anymore means if you have either a smartphone or an internet-enabled tablet or laptop, and then this grows, everything grows exponentially, based on how much privilege you have to have more than one of those things. Anyone who interacts with them is facing profound deficits in the area of focus. When I was in graduate school, roughly 10,000 years ago, we were doing research, especially on children, in the area of focus by asking if children could focus on a single task for up to, in the peer-reviewed research, it was like up to 30 minutes. Now we are doing research on can a child focus for up to 30 to 60 seconds. This is how profoundly our expectations have changed around the area of focus. At the same time, if you ask both individuals what creates a greater contentment in their adult life, or if you ask people like employers or supervisors what makes for a kind of a happy and successful employee, they will tell you that focus is one of the things that sets people apart. So an internal sense that I can focus on something and that I can use some of that focus to come back to a sense of self, to emotionally regulate, is highly correlated with a content and happy life. So it's the reason I bring that up is it is really important that we offer opportunities, not just passive opportunities, or not to expect life to hand our children and us opportunities to focus and delay anymore, because they're not going to, right? I think I mentioned this last time, Laura Ingalls just had to be bored a bunch of the time. She's just like walking behind the coach, and she finds a stick and, oh my gosh, it's a doll. And then another minute, oh, it's a magic wand, We no longer have to be bored. We never have to be bored. We never have to be still. And these are the things that create the ability to be focused and to do emotional regulation. We talked last time about what's called the hidden curriculum, which is the manner by which tech companies are creating their apps and their devices. And basically the hidden curriculum is to keep us all connected to our devices and to the apps that we play within as much as possible. We also know that a primary goal of most tech platforms is that it will get us engaged in what's called task switching. Task switching is just a fancy word for multitasking. And if we look at the research around multitasking, which I did again today, I always do it every time I'm going to speak about this, there is no research that associates task switching or multitasking with satisfaction in doing a task or with success in completing it to high expectations. In fact, it always, every time, task switching and multitasking diminishes our ability to feel content with our own performance, as well as to enhance our own performance. So if we think about the fact that these devices that we interact with and the things that have been saving us in this time are actually created in such a way to make us more attendant to things that will force us to multitask more, we have to admit that we are working against a really hard system, right? So I've got some slides I'm going to share, and if our tech gets wonky like it did last time, I'm prepared to just go without them. And let's see here if this is going to, there we go. All right. Okay, so we have to think about, in light of all that big, long introduction, the fact that that attention is really a commodity, just like money or just like time. The attention that we have the ability to focus on things is a limited quantity. We know there are lots of research studies that tell us that our ability to focus our attention is better at the beginning of the day than it is at the end of the day when we've used a lot of it up. And probably you've noticed that in yourself and your kiddos. The tricky thing is that we have created a reality for our kids where they have so many sparkly, shiny things available to them, and to ourselves as well. Remember, we're doing dual process right now, that attending to things in their physical spaces and in their physical bodies is nowhere near as exciting as tending to things in the digital spaces that they reside in. Especially given that every time we do that act of task switching or multitasking, our brain releases these flashes of dopamine, which tell us to be excited and happy. They also release all kinds of other neurotransmitters that tell us to hang on and wait and see what's going to happen next. So given that literally our brains are telling us that we need to, that our own physical environments are less exciting or less worthy of attendance than our digital ones, it's going to be extra hard to get our kids to really focus on attention. Now we're going to do a really quick little exercise here to, let me just do one thing quickly. We're going to do a little exercise here to kind of help you see which regions of the brain are most effective in terms of wiring for focus and regulation. So if you take your hand and you tuck your thumb in and create a fist around it, this is a great little portable model of the brain. And the brain basically works on the principle of use it or lose it. And on where you expose it to information, it will wire together. And the brain is complex, but if we think about it as this fist, we think about this part as the brain stem, which is back here. That's responsible for moving and walking and burping and farting. This back part of the brain is the region that's responsible for deep critical thought. The front regions of the brain are responsible for taking information in and routing it to the region of the brain where it needs to be kind of encoded. And in here is in this thumb that is deep in our little fist here is the emotional centers of the brain. So the centers that regulate emotion. That you really, if you're doing this and you feel it, there is one part of our brain model that has access to every other part of the brain. And it is this little tiny top of the tip, from the top knuckle to the tip of your finger. And when you feel it in here, it has access, it touches the emotional regions of the brain. It has access to the brain stem, to the critical thinking parts, and to the kind of information sorting parts. This would be called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the most amazing part of the brain. And it responsible for executive function. And basically what executive function is this. Executive function just means in our day-to-day life that when this part of the brain is wired robustly, and we've kind of offered our children opportunities to wire that region of the brain by doing things like being still, being bored, being uncomfortable, having to do deep critical thought, we wire that region of the brain that's responsible for bodily regulation, which is part of the biggest element of emotional regulation, when we can bring our body to a sense of calm, when we can be still enough to let our adrenal glands quiet down and the brain stop producing floods of neurotransmitters, we're more able to be emotionally regulated. This part of the brain is also responsible for attuned communication, meaning that I can talk to you in this way here, and then if I'm on a big stage, I can talk big, and make big motions. Or if we're having a really intense communication, I can stop and listen. Think about how important attuned communication is for our children's ability to function well in the world. It's also responsible for emotional balance. So can we feel, really positive, strong, happy feelings? And also can we feel constructive levels of anger and maintain balance in our emotional expression and experience? It's also responsible for response flexibility. And basically what this means is that if I have started a behavior and I get corrected, or someone tells me maybe that's not the best idea, or my body tells me it's not the best idea, I can be flexible and stop. I don't have to just power through no matter what. And this is what we see with things like, okay, we're going to take the slides down. I'm just going to talk to you from my slides. I'm so sorry, everybody. I don't know why we have sad. It's very sad, but I will send slides to folks. So you can now turn your videos on if you want to be interactive. So basically what we see with response flexibility is that if we have this region of the brain effectively wired, we will see that children and ourselves can really have a different level of kind of resilience and grit. And resilience and grit are two things that are highly necessary to be functional in the world, right? Resilience and grit are what let us be able to handle failures without experiencing psychological symptoms of distress. So we really want to make sure that we are privileging experiences that will help our kids wire that. Also is related to empathy. We want kids that have empathy. We also want them to have what's called psychologically a self-knowing awareness. And a self-knowing awareness is being tapped in enough with our own bodies and our surroundings in such a way that we can again, moderate our behaviors. This will be especially important as we're asking our kids to focus more while they are at the same time still being required to be so much on screens where they're being asked to multitask over and over and over. So what we want to think about is the fact that research tells us really clearly that when we are using a screen and trying to do anything else, especially if we are doing more than one thing on a screen. So if we're, let's say, working on a paper, or a student is, in class, but also on YouTube, what we know is that the research tells us that there is a clear IQ drop that is evidenced in any kind of performance. And that IQ drop is of 10%. 10 points. So if a kiddo who is very bright is multitasking, especially with screens, and trying to do any kind of memorization task or anything with the brain, or processing task like writing or doing an assignment, they're going to be approaching that task with 10 less kind of points, or with 10% less capability than what we would want them to have. And that's profound. So if we can help our children understand that they are actually shortchanging themselves by trying to overtask the brain, and thereby being emotionally dysregulated and unable to focus, sometimes they can make the choice to, tolerate gritting and gutting their way through a single task. This is why last time my big emphasis was one thing at a time and not multitasking, right? So the other thing that we have to be aware of is that the brain isn't the only thing regulating the body, and that the way in which we use technology now and the way in which technology presents itself to us actually involves the endocrine system, which is a system that resides in the kind of central core of our body, and it is what releases hormones. And so when we're interacting with technology, especially forms of technology that have visual and auditory stimulation, both our endocrine system is releasing hormones and our brain is kind of wiring and firing in all regions of the brain, with the exception of the prefrontal cortex. Now, what is tricky about that when we think about parenting teens and parenting pre-adolescents is that pre-adolescents and teens already have, as we know, overactive hormonal systems, right? We know that their hormones are being released in crazy ways that make them feel very dysregulated. And we also know that the most kind of active time of brain wiring in the prefrontal cortex is in this pre-adolescent stage. Neurologists and neuropsychologists have a really interesting way about talking about especially the middle school age brain. And oftentimes they call it the sprinkler brain. And what that means is that all the regions of the brain get very lit up by almost any kind of stimulation, specifically when it is a sort of a form of hyperstimulation like screens are. But that is the exact thing that disengages the prefrontal cortex from the rest of the brain. So this is what they mean by sprinkler brain. A kiddo sees something exciting and it literally releases hormones and neurotransmitters in such a way that the prefrontal cortex goes like this: detach. And it goes as far away from the rest of the brain as humanly possible, at the same time that the child is experiencing all kinds of neurotransmitter stimulation here, leading to things like excitement and overstimulation emotionally. And we've got things like adrenaline going crazy in the hormone system. And it takes so much work to get that prefrontal cortex to come back in and hunker with the brain, that a child stays dysregulated both physiologically, neurologically, and emotionally for 30 minutes post-engagement. That means that if your kiddo or you yourself have been on YouTube for an hour, that there's going to be 30 minutes after which that time that your neurological system, your endocrine system, and just your sense of emotional well-being is going to feel off kilter. Now, I'm guessing if I could see you all, or if we were in the same room, you would probably be going like, oh, that makes sense, right? I mean, any of you that are showing yourselves, does this make sense? This is why kiddos have a hard time walking away from their tech. They're not trying to be difficult. They literally are having physiological reactions that lead them to be dysregulated. And this is why toward the end of our talk, we're going to need to talk so much about how we literally onboard tools to help give them the skills that they need so that they can tolerate the physiological dysregulation that has existed. I would normally show a video here, but I'm not going to trust that that is going to work. So what I'm going to do is try to embed it in an email and send it to you all later. And I'll send it to Jackie and she can send it out. But basically in this video, what you see is it's a very tame and mild example of what happens over and over and over for kiddos. And this is true not only in entertainment technology, but also in educational technology, where we have a high level of visual stimulation coming alongside a high level of audio stimulation. And the two of them are a little bit mismatched in such a way as to create a sense of alertness. We can't go into how that all happens. It's all a result of neurodevelopment, where developers of technology, including educational technologies, are watching real-time brain scans while an individual works with their platform. And basically what happens is they want to keep the attention and desire centers of the brain very heightened. But in order to do that, because we don't have the ability to attend to something for very long anymore, They have to switch which sense they're trying to keep heightened awareness of. So for a bit, it will be in the audio, then it will go to visual, then it will go to audio, then it will go to a different kind of audio that stimulates attention. But basically what I'm saying is there is within the app or within our devices, all of these things already fighting for the brain's attention. If you add to that the fact that we are human beings with bodies in physical spaces that even when we're engaging with our screens have distracting things happening, right? We are being continually distracted in such a way that it's very, very hard to be able to kind of focus in on the self. And that's why, the whole second half of what we're going to talk about is how do we literally help rewire the brain in such a way that we can stop, pause, and redirect the attention internally, because without that skill, we're kind of lost. And this is, I'm sure many of you experience this every day. Kiddos who have grown up listening, having their ear pods in while they're doing homework and listening to music with lyrics, or watching TV shows while they're doing their homework, or watching YouTube while they're listening to a teacher. They will tell you, and I would love to see, maybe you can use your little sticker reactions in Zoom or I'll try to follow the chat too, but you'll hear kiddos saying that they can't focus without music or YouTube. Or anybody relate to this? And that is really confusing to those of us probably that can't relate to that didn't have that reality, but that is true. The trouble is that it feels like they can't focus without those things. But in reality, what they're saying is that they are uncomfortable trying to focus on one thing at a time. That yes, they can't because they haven't practiced it. The tricky thing is that when we have been able to construct research studies about this, every single time someone listens to lyric-based music or watches YouTube while listening to a lecture, their recall, retention, and output as a result is reduced significantly. However, every time the person feels as though they have been more competent, right? So it's what they are. It's just like everything else, what we have trained ourselves to be used to, we tie that with what we can do rather than thinking about, well, what would it look like if we did things a little differently? So I'll send that link to you, but you can see when you watch the video, you'll see how the lyrics of the song and the sound of the song do not at all match the visual images that we're seeing. But what it creates in an fMRI scan is this heightened sense of alertness, but it's not in the regions of the brain that are related to deep critical thought or to the ability to be emotionally regulated. In fact, it's in the regions of the brain that lead us to feel emotionally overwhelmed, irritable, and kind of exhausted. Okay. Next, we're going to just talk a little bit about emotional regulation. And emotional regulation, so what we just talked about is the physiological dysregulation that results and that leads to or is correlated with an inability to focus. Emotional regulation is a little different. It also involves the endocrine system, hormones, and the brain, the wiring, neurotransmitters, and all of that. But basically with emotional regulation, what we're seeing is that in this generation, or well, now in 2 generations worth of kiddos who have grown up with this stuff, we're seeing 4 correlated traits related to emotional regulation that are very heightened with dependence upon technology. The first one is that we're seeing a decrease in empathy, or some research studies, rather than coding that as empathy, they're seeing kind of a heightened indifference about others. So whether that we say that as empathy or a heightened indifference, that these folks really have not had the same opportunity to think about empathy and to create empathic connections, because so much of the spaces within which they connect with people are based on judgment and quick opinions of a curated image of self, right? So these images that they see in the spaces they inhabit are curated and are made to look certain ways. And when they then enter out into the world, they know they can't measure up to the curated profile that they have made, which makes them feel a little bit indifferent about others and a little more hyper-focused. Again, this is not shaming in any way. It's the reality we've created for them. We also see, in terms of emotional regulation, a higher concern oftentimes for children about what other people think about me and feel about me than how I feel about me and in me. So there is this emphasis on what's happening outside of me in relation to me, over the ability to kind of, how do I regulate and comfort my own feelings? They are also dealing with this kind of model of emotional processing that makes it harder for them to know how to process their own emotions directly with key, safe and healthy people in their lives. And I'm going to send you 2 videos that will be the second 2 videos in the email I send, that shows you the kind of modeling that they are seeing, how people are dealing with their feelings. A lot of the influencers that they are, especially middle school age children, are following, do a lot of emotional processing in social media spaces or in places like YouTube vlogs that are highly, highly sensational. And that are not modeled on kind of this internal sense of either processing kind of intellectually or externally doing verbal processing that really helps resolve feelings. Instead, what a lot of these folks will say when you ask them in research circles is that the way they try to deal with their feelings is either by distracting themselves from them, leaning into their tech and trying to forget what they're feeling, right? Or becoming overly distraught and not knowing how to soothe themselves. So distraction and kind of stimulation are the 2 ways that kiddos now will tell you they're trying to bring themselves to a sense of calm. And we know that neither of those things works very well. So what we have to think about, what this all comes down to, is this kind of tricky building block thing that I would normally be showing you, this weird wonky video of trying to build a wall. But we have to think about the fact that emotional regulation requires self-soothing skills. So in order to be able to come back to a sense of calm, kiddos and adults need self-soothing skills. But getting and implementing self-soothing skills anymore now requires focus. Where life used to offer us opportunities to be bored, you know, there were only 3 channels on every day, and at midnight they went off and you just had to be with your own self, or where there were only so many TV shows you could watch. It forced us to focus. It forced us to be still enough that we could onboard some self-soothing skills. But now that's no longer the case. So emotional regulation requires self-soothing skills. Implementation of self-soothing skills requires focus, and building focus requires intentional work. And the tricky thing is that we really don't know how to do that in the ways that we used to, and life doesn't offer us opportunities. In fact, given that equation, if we said that same equation in a different way, we would say that regulation of the brain plus regulation of the emotional centers that are kind of that heart and soul and the brain, those 2 together, if we can regulate the brain and get wiring put into that region, that prefrontal cortex that will help our kiddos focus, and we learn emotional regulation, those are the people, if you look at the research, those are the people who are able to focus and who are able to come to a space of calm that allows them to feel content in life. So if we want to be able to focus and we want to be able to be calm, we're going to have to do this hard work of making some of our embodied spaces not less than our digital spaces, but actually more interesting. We're gonna have to flip that less than symbol, you know, the other way. We're gonna need to think about how can we some of the time not be abstinent with our tech, because that's not realistic. And our kids actually need to see us learn how to live with it, but how to moderate our tech use so that we can onboard some self-soothing skills. So the first thing that we have to do in order to think about how can we take back our focus, how can we reteach emotional regulation, is we have to think about getting buy-in from our kids. And the only way that we can do that is by helping them begin to kind of scan and see how they feel. And so when I do these research circles with students on, you know, how are they feeling in this time of using tech so much, what I will do is just start with them by asking them to just sit for a couple of seconds and breathe. Well, let's do this. Let's just do it together. And I'm going to model it for you. So basically what I would ask you to do is just kind of, if you're in an uncomfortable seated position, get comfortable. And from that space, if you feel safe and comfortable closing your eyes, do that. If not, soften your gaze so you're just sort of halfway looking And for just a few moments, I want you to direct all of your attention to the sensory experiences around you in your environment. So smell the smells, feel the air touching your skin, feel the clothing on your body. Are there any things you hear? And while you're paying attention to everything around you, begin just taking some steady breaths. You don't have to do it in any certain way. Just notice the breath entering in and leaving. Smelling, tasting, feeling, hearing. And on the next inhale, I want you to take all that attention that you've been giving the surroundings and draw all of that attention inside. And starting at the top of your head, imagine that it's like a feather just bumping against each side of the inside of your being. And this attention is just noticing any place where there's any tension as it floats through your head, thinking about any thoughts that are really just holding you hostage. As it floats through your neck and shoulders, is there any tension? Notice at your heart region, any feelings, any strong feelings, tired, bored. And then let the attention float all the way through, noticing places of discomfort. And from that space, I just want you to spend just a few seconds thinking about what things that you engaged today that gave you life, that made you feel energetic or happy or calm. And then take a moment to think about what things did you do today that took life away, that made you feel blech or tired or zapped. And then on your next exhale, just draw your attention out again, open your eyes. And what I would do in a research circle, or what you could do at your family table, is after an experience like this, just begin to talk about, so what did you notice? What did you notice when you were paying attention to the environment around you? And what did you notice as you scanned? Were there thoughts that were stuck in your head, or did you have a lot of strong feelings? And then what are the things that gave you life and took it away? And what I am hearing, especially in the last month from students, is the sense that the continual need to be attached and trying to pay attention to a lecture while their head is just overwhelmed with thoughts and their body is feeling so irritated at being stuck. I just hear this over and over and over. So starting the conversation is the first step to kind of getting the sense of buy-in, helping our students understand that, yes, while it feels like you need to take every break from class to check your social media so that you know what's going on, or while it feels like you need to catch up on your video game with your friends that you play with, that it is crucial that we spend at the very minimum 10 minutes a day practicing the ability to do absolutely nothing. And this is not an easy thing to get buy-in for. But if we do it in non-shaming ways, remembering that we have to model this for it to be effective, we have a very good chance of then getting the opportunity to help our children think about how to step down from certain forms of technology that create greater load on our ability to focus and that dysregulate us even more. So the kinds of content digitally that are going to really, really hurt our children's ability to focus, first of all, is a high quantity of content. Second of all, is multitasking. So anytime a person is using more than one device at a time, the load on the brain and the body creates such a profound effect that it literally prunes off wiring in that prefrontal cortex that is responsible for focus, for delay, for the ability to be able to regulate. So even just getting ourselves to move to using only one device at a time is a profound way of increasing the ability to focus. Now, on that device, if we can make it such that we have only one platform open, that right there will also force us to focus. But remember, we have to model this first. That means we don't have our phone sitting with us when we're looking at our tablet or our laptop. It means we're not checking our texts while we are listening to this talk. It literally means doing one thing at a time. And even small bursts of this, especially if they're over 10 minutes, will help grow our focus. So first of all, we have to practice the ability to literally do nothing. Second of all, we have to practice the ability to not multitask between devices or with devices, or even to do things with our bodies while we are with our devices. So there's some really interesting research that shows that if humans have earplugs in and are, let's say, warming up with a team, but they have their own music on, they are less, the regions of the brain related to motivation and task completion are not as stimulated as if they're going into a team activity all listening to the same music. So if that makes sense. So we want to not be multitasking all the time. And the only way that we're going to build focus is by practicing that. Then in terms of getting buy-in and stepping down with our devices, we want to not only step down our multitasking, but we want to begin to assess. And in the first session, we talked about assessment, and you can go back and watch that. We want to be able to move to slower moving content. So we want, if a kiddo is playing a very, very fast moving video game for 2 or 3 hours a day, we want to say, okay, you can still play that for 2.5 hours, and half of an hour, we're going to find a slow moving video game that's collaborative that you're going to engage with for half an hour of that. And what we're trying to do then is kind of, we've inoculated ourselves against focus and regulation is what we've done. We've so overstimulated ourselves that we always need more of the stimulation to make us feel certain ways. And we can tolerate boredom less. So we want to move slower moving content, high quality content. And I'm going to tell you more about this in a minute. And then think about anything that we can also step down if our kids are only consuming technology, if we can get them to transfer some of that into building technology rather than only being consuming in it. And so some examples of this, and I'm going to send this slide to you, would be if your child, and all of us now have impaired focus. I will admit that I do not have the same level of focus that I had 5 years ago for sure, and 20 years ago for sure, because I can do so many things at once. But some step down would be if your child is used to listening to music while they study. A step down approach would be no more ear pods, no more headphones. And we're going to listen to music that is either, rhythmic, non-lyric music is best. That's why classical music is best. Baroque music of the classical music forms is the very best. You can find some electronic dance music that is actually pretty good, that is rhythmic, but not lyric and not too distracting. So even just making that shift, instead of ear pods, it's out in the open and it's lyric free. If we're going to step down from YouTube, if we find that we're really dependent on YouTube, and that is a highly disruptive platform in terms of its toll on focus, we might want to switch our use to something like even Vimeo. Content on Vimeo is much slower moving, more high quality, or a platform like Canopy, and I'll put that in the chat in a little bit. If our kiddos are finding themselves sinking huge amounts of time into social media, we're going to want to do a step down approach into, you can spend a little bit of time on social media, and then you can spend time right now video chatting, or if you can find a way of being together at a distance, moving that content out of just this fast moving kind of just judgment passive way into an active requirement. If our kiddos are watching hours of TikTok, requiring them to make one TikTok for every 20 minutes that they watch. If they're gaming, beginning to get them involved in some programming. Programming involves some of the same skills as gaming, but it's going to definitely build our child's ability to focus rather than taking it away. If they're playing a violent first-person shooter game, stepping down into some kind of collaborative games could be helpful. Or if they're only ever reading on screens, they've got, a Kindle and they do all their reading there. For every book that they read there, they read one paper book. So what I mean, I hope that makes sense. So what I mean by getting buy-in and step down is taking some of the things that we do on screens and migrating them to spaces that aren't so fast moving and overstimulating. Just that will force firing into that prefrontal cortex. So if you even, I'll just give you one piece of data. For people who read primarily on Kindles, there's some really interesting research that if you put them in an fMRI scan and ask them to read the first part of the first chapter of a book on the Kindle, and they watch their fMRI scans, and then you take them and you have them read the second half of that first chapter of the book, and they read it on paper in an fMRI scan, the same thing. And then they have a control group, so they switch it, and the different groups are reading the different halves of the chapters. Basically, the people who are reading on a screen, their brains have, in that fMRI scan, real time, have firing and wiring in the visual centers of the brain and this automatic region of the brain. If you look at the brain of the same people reading the same content on paper, there is firing and wiring throughout the entire brain. And basically the way that, or why researchers, or the way researchers explain this, that'd be a better way of saying it, is that reading a paper book anymore requires such novel levels of focus that we no longer have, that it forces the brain actually to wire in all the different regions, including self-control and emotional regulation, because we're so bored with a paper book that it creates this robust wiring. There's another great study I have to tell you about because it's just so interesting. This researcher in Asia wanted to provide fMRI scanning machines, or I'm sorry, wanted to be able to help a hospital fund fMRI scans to be able to do better and more robust research. So this client hired them to create a foolproof study that would prove that that screen-based interaction was better for the brain than non-screen-based interaction. And so they created this very cool, highly it's a beautiful piece of software. And then they had two groups, totally randomly assigned. One group was interacting with the computer program, and the other was doing, now I forget what it's called, but it's basically a task. It has a name in research, but it's a task where you just are adding single digit numbers together for 30 minutes. So you're literally just doing single digit addition. And they wanted to see which created more robust wiring and firing in the brain. And it's not surprising to you because I'm bringing it up. The one that created the most robust firing and wiring was the paper and pencil task, because it required the brain to push out into all these regions that it no longer pushes out into, like discipline of staying with a task. They were being watched by researchers. They had to do it. It put a lot of firing and wiring into the prefrontal cortex. So again, if we aren't practicing these tasks and offering and creating opportunities for building the brain in these ways, we won't have them. We are going to have to require some boredom if we want our kiddos to be able to tolerate and to expand their ability to focus. We're also going to need to teach self-soothing. And so this is where, some really practical skills can come in place that I'm going to just list for you here, and then and give you some examples. We're going to do them together. Because again, if we go back to thinking about the fact that the ability to focus is only now going to be built on us forcing some new and novel experiences that will create our ability to pause, just to take a break, and that will also enable us to access self-soothing skills that we've been taught, then that means that we have to teach the self-soothing skills. So the first one is just that active breathing. And basically the cue that I use is to smell the roses and blow out the candles. That's the best form of breathing you can do. So let's just do that together. And taking breathing breaks throughout the day in your home is a fantastic way of getting this onboarded. Just to say, whenever you hear me comment on your tech, or whenever you tell me to stop checking my phone as mom, I'm going to take 2 or 3 deep breaths. That smelling the roses, blowing out the candles is a great first level. The second level, which we talked about last time, is just that when you do take that inhale, expanding out the lower part of the lungs, making your belly big, and then dropping it down, or your belly down flat on the exhale. These kind of skills also help with focus because they actually increase the amount of oxygen that we take in. And oxygen is one of the best tools for self-soothing. It is also what we need for focus. If you think about it, when you're feeling nervous and you can't quite get your attention focused, a lot of times you'll find yourself going like, right? That's what our brain needs for focus. So using those kinds of breathing skills. We can also do things for focus, like using things like zones of regulation. So basically zones of regulation, and you may even use these at IVA, a lot of schools use them, but it's basically using this idea of we all exist at one color of a stoplight throughout the day, all day long. We exist in either a green state of regulation, which is kind of like, I'm ready to go. I feel okay. I'm not overly distracted. So, you know, if I'm in class, I don't have YouTube on and I'm not trying to do 4 things at once. I'm engaged, I'm alert, I'm ready to go. Or I'm in a yellow state, and that yellow state says, I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling with digital spaces, I'm feeling like I've got too much going on. I haven't moved my body enough, or I have tried to do too many things at once and I'm so scattered and unfocused. Or I'm in a red zone, and a red zone means I am highly overstimulated. I am I'm highly engaged in a tech space that is requiring me to task switch, which I've trained myself to feel like is me paying attention, but is actually me being distractible. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And that red zone is that I'm either so distracted or so overstimulated that I literally cannot focus on what you are asking of me or what the task around me is asking of me. And so if we can train ourselves and our children to be able to identify which of those zones they are currently in, it can really help us be able to figure out, okay, so if you're in a red zone, but you need to be able to focus on a task to get it done so that you can go on to recreational things, what are the specific things that soothe you or that bring you from that red zone into a green or yellow zone? And this is a really helpful tool. The final helpful tool that I want to hand off tonight for focus, and this is borrowed out of the 12-step movement, but oftentimes when we're having a hard time focusing or emotionally regulating, it's related to one of 4 emotions that we're experiencing. And these can be seen in the acronym HALT, H-A-L-T. And basically they stand for, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? And am I tired? And interestingly, these 4 things that are super dysregulating and can lead us to engage in behaviors that don't actually help us regulate or focus or calm. They just distract us from it, like drinking or binging on Netflix or whatever. But these are also 4 things that are impacted by our tech use. You know, we get so involved in our tech that we forget to eat, right? We get so overwhelmed that what the reaction of digital overwhelm in the brain often looks like the brain of an angry person. We also are not as connected to other people, so we're lonely. And we don't know how to do that. And now there is a bunch of research coming out right now that has been taking place during the pandemic that shows that loneliness levels are actually, we were going into the pandemic under what was called a loneliness pandemic. I had Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp all reach out to me about the loneliness pandemic and what they could do to change it. None of them chose me for their committees because I told them I thought they were actually counteractive. But if you think about it, if we were already facing a loneliness pandemic related to our social media use, how much more are we experiencing that now, and our children especially? And then tired. Our tech use makes us very, very tired at a physiological level and an emotional level. So if we learn to use that acronym as a way of stopping and doing a self-scan, okay, so just a moment, I'm seeing that you're in the red zone, so we're using regulation, or I'm seeing that you aren't being able to focus, you're just distracted and overwhelmed and really doing the sprinkler brain thing. I'm just gonna ask you to just take a couple breaths, and now I'm gonna ask you, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you feeling lonely? Are you tired? Once we know about those 4 things, we can do some things to deliberately help with them that will hopefully move you through the yellow zone and into the green zone, where you have more access for focus and where you can come back to center to be able to access the self-soothing skills that we've kind of onboarded, and that can let you be able to feel a sense of agency and volition in tending to your surroundings. So that is what I have for you in terms of what the research is saying about focus and emotional regulation, specifically with middle school kiddos. I will definitely send you videos, but I'm curious from here, you know, we have 35 minutes. What are the kinds of things that have come up for you, either as a result of what we've been talking about tonight or unrelated, but are related to tech that I might be able to address with you?
Doreen, this isn't a direct question. I just want to say thank you. But I feel like the HALT metaphor for me, or not metaphor, but acronym, needs another letter, because whenever I'm on tech too long, I totally forget to go to the bathroom. I'm like, something's wrong with my body. Something's wrong. Oh yes, I need to go to the restroom. I don't know which one of the letters that is. Maybe it's in the anger section. I don't know.
Maybe it goes with that hunger piece, and that just we lose touch with our embodied selves. This is a major issue on Twitch. I should bring this up because probably many of you have kiddos who spend time on Twitch. So Twitch is the most viewed site by high school and middle school students right now. It was created as a place for video gamers to stream them live playing the game, and then they also, so you see a picture of them playing the game, you see a picture of what they see on their screen, and then you see they tailor it many different ways. But many of the world's biggest YouTube influencers, I think something now like it's 60% of the largest YouTube influencers have moved their platforms to Twitch as well. So it's becoming also a passive space of encountering influencers. But we have had in the last 3 years 3 deaths that have occurred on Twitch during live streams. And these have not been of high school students. These have been of, I don't know, I probably didn't bring this up last time, but the average gamer, anybody want to venture a guess of the average gamer profile in the US? You know, what's the demographic of the average gamer? Nobody? 35 to 40-year-old white men. And the tricky thing about that is that those are the dads of many of our kiddos, right? So our kiddos are wanting and aspiring to do the same things that their parents do. And I hate gender stereotypes. I despise them. So it's hard for me to bring that statistic up a lot of times. But basically, and all 3 of those deaths occurred in that demographic. So these were 35 to 40-year-old white men who, the way that people work to get followers on Twitch is by doing prolonged gaming streams. So the longer the stream, the more people they will get. They will oftentimes do fundraising. So it's like, hey, toss me $1 and every hour you're on, I'll match it. And then I'm going to donate it to the children's hospital or whatever. And in all 3 of these cases, there was massive cardiac arrest somewhere between hour 22 and 24. And the tricky thing is that it's not surprising. And that the way that the reason this came to my mind is that the way that a lot of these people do these streams is they do things like wear Depends. And at actual video gaming conferences where they are going to do live streams, it's not uncommon for Depends to have a booth there. It's, because literally if we have allowed ourselves, and that's us grown people, to become, so we've got hyper focused on our tech, that means we lose the focus on our physiological body, and we pay a price for it all the time, and we aren't even aware of the price that we pay for it. That's that sense of agitation and irritation, is that we have not tended to our bodies. Now that I've freaked you all out, please feel free to ask anything. It's not all bad news.
If I can say something, I think myself, I have put my own student in the, tech world when we're looking for items like to work out at home and we want a weight bench. we go to OfferUp, we go to this site, we go to this site, we go to this site, we're trying to get the best deal. So, I mean, I feel like I'm doing it too, continuously having him be on his tech because we're trying to figure out, the less expensive route to go and getting something for a lot cheaper. And so we're like digging in and trying to find different things. So I see how I could be contributing to that myself now.
That is so brave and courageous to say, and thank you. And I want to say that would be, though, a perfect example of using tech for what it's really, really good for. That's probably not going to impact your kiddo's ability to focus or delay emotionally regulate, because you're using it for a task to do something in the embodied world. I'd be more concerned about if you were, sitting and passively watching 8 hours of Netflix together or something. But I really appreciate your nod to the fact that, yes, another thing we passively do all the time with our kids is ask them to solve our tech problems for us, which is a horrible modeling. Is horrible. We need to some of the time figure it out ourselves and kind of know the domain where our kids are spending time. We wouldn't get a pool and then tell our kids like, oh, teach yourself how to swim, just dive on in. We would never do that. But we do it all the time with our tech. That's another thing I should say. If you are noticing focus issues with your kiddos and your kiddos are engaging with tech a lot, it would be important to ask them like, hey, can we do these things together? Can I play your game with you or watch you play your game? Or can I watch the YouTube channels that you watch? Not because I'm going to shame you or take it all away, but because I want to understand. I just realized I have failed and I don't know. Yes, I see Rachel. Bring your...
I was thinking a lot what you were saying. I'm a teacher, and I was thinking about like the multiple devices, and that the way that I'm teaching is like having, my students on a screen, and I'm sharing a screen, and I'm checking their work on a screen, and I'm just like curious is about like, do I just say, well, that's how I have to do my job because I have to be able to monitor all these things, but what am I sacrificing? And I'm kind of curious about like, is this hurting my ability to make good decisions with my students while I'm teaching? What would you say about like the sacrifice of giving up certain of our we have these technologies that help us in the classroom, but what are we sacrificing?
Such a good question. And I think part of what you are, or in answer, I would say part of what you're addressing is why I'm writing this second book, which is, I think we will leave the pandemic. I mean, prior to the pandemic, I was talking about all of these things and the research was, pouring out, but we're going to leave having lost even more. And it's been a necessary loss. It's not like we had a choice. I'm sure none of you wanted to do school this way, ever. You would never have chosen IVA if this is not ideal. And so I do think if there are ways that we can become flexible, especially as this continues on and kiddos are more overwhelmed and we are more overwhelmed, this is where the buy-in and step down might have to happen. I always feel so weird in these situations because, Jackie, forgive me if I say something that is directly in opposition to but
the question is, I don't even know how to answer it. And Rachel and I were private chatting about how do we promote teacher self-care when teacher self-care is the opposite of all the tools that allow us direct access to kids right now. So right. I don't know how to deal with that. And I don't even know to say to my teachers, like, sorry, we're just going to put your self-care aside for the next however many months until it just doesn't feel right. So please say everything because I need.
Well, it is such an impossible, like I said earlier until last time, this is such an impossible time. And maybe the people who are having some of the hardest times are on this call. Teachers, children, and parents, right? And so some of the time, if we can ditch curriculum. I mean, we might have to ditch curriculum some of the time. And we might have to say that part of, and I believe this to my core, that a huge part of what school offers children is the opportunity to learn how to self-regulate, how to be a self amongst others. And so if one day we have to say, we're ditching curriculum and I want everybody to bring something creative to your space, and we're going to share the experience of some music and just create something. And I'm going to do it too. And at the end, and we're going to be silent, but we'll have this shared space together. And then, you know, I'll show you my little origami star I made, or, you know, whatever it is. Or to be able to say today, I am here to tell you, I can give you this amazing news from last year's neuropsychology conference. The keynote speaker said, I wish I had a visual aid here, but I don't, that they had created the most groundbreaking academic and brain building tool that had ever been created. Yeah. And then he turned around and showed a paper book. So literally, if for an entire class period, you say, I'm going to trust everybody to go read a paper book for this whole 45 minutes. Or I'm here to tell you, if you could trust everybody, or, you know, get parents on board, or parents help teachers, we're going to do 15 minutes of boredom. And literally you as a teacher get to go and stare out the window or breathe fresh air for 15 full minutes. Or drink the most amazing cup of tea while you watch the swirls go. I mean, even small things like this now are radical acts of care for our emotional selves and our brains and bodies. We are completely taxed. Does that even get anywhere near, Rachel? What? And if not, can you tell me more what I can speak to?
No, I love everything you're saying. I think what it brings up in me is my fear of losing, my fear that they won't do it. Like, I'm just thinking about how the buy-in is so important, because I think I would be so panicked. Well, we're doing this and they're all on YouTube, you know, I think like I would have to let go of that fear that nobody's doing what I'm telling them to do. But I wonder if it's also me letting go, because again, I'm just thinking that might be my own, I have to let go of that too and model it for them. And maybe
it's probably both and. So letting go a little bit and then teaching them. And also if you've got parents, which this whole, you know, if every parent watched this recording or another recording that somebody makes about self-soothing, and you get that buy-in. And then, so I can relate, because when I do this in middle schools, I am asking the middle school students to do a 10-minute silent sit with me at the end. And the teachers think I'm nuts. I mean, they're like, yeah, good luck with that. You're ridiculous and stupid. But it works. I've only had it not work one time, but I have to look like an absolute idiot and work really hard to get their buy-in, and then start it with them, and then kind of, you know, and so maybe if you speak up to them, and that's one thing my all-time hero is Mr. Rogers, you know, who always talked about respect children. And so if we can let go of our fear that they aren't going to comply, and they might not comply, but also work really hard to respect them and help teach them some of this stuff, like you are going to be, I have even said to students, you're going to be a better video game streamer by learning how to have 10 minutes of silence, because your brain is just going to be a lot healthier and more integrated. So I'm going to trust you that you're going to do this with me. You're going to be a better influencer, even though it makes me feel a little sick to my stomach whenever I say these things. This was really interesting. The Kaiser Family Foundation did a survey last year of 4th grade through 8th grade students, and asking what they wanted to be when they grew up. And the number one thing was a YouTube influencer. And it was a huge study. So anyway, I do think it's probably a combination of those two, you know, giving up some of our control, but privileging it also. And maybe you even say to them in kind of like a respectful way, like, I respect you all so much to tell you that I am absolutely at my end. I'm at my end. So we're leaving our screens on, our cameras on, but we are taking 10 minutes to look out the window. And I'm serious about it. And you are going to feel from me when we come back from this 10 minutes, I'm going to be a different teacher. So I'm setting my timer. Here we go. I don't know. Did you guys feel the intensity of that?
I would be a different teacher if I did that for sure. So yes.
I've done it at colleges where I lose and I just am like, okay, now we're doing silent sit, everybody. And just in the middle for 3 minutes, we just sit. But it requires a lot of being willing to be really uncomfortable.
I think speaking as a parent, I think that that would be honored. And I mean, I agree that because I'm not in the same room as my daughter, so I don't know how she's reacting. But as a parent, from a parent's perspective, I think just that modeling that Doreen's been talking about, as far as just saying like what we're talking about. And I've heard, I'm kind of coming in and out of the room, and sometimes I have heard the teachers say like, how are you really feeling? Like what's really going on? And I think that's the most valuable thing that you're all doing for our kiddos right now, is allowing them to feel what they're feeling. And even being able to say like, I totally agree that, if you just said like, Ella just commented, I'm your daughter, and she's agreeing. Yay. But yeah, if you said like, okay, everybody, what's out your window right now? And, I think that would be really well received. And so just putting my parent and I guess daughter comment in on that.
I give you all so much compassion. I mean, you are all experiencing communal trauma. Trauma is anything that interrupts our ability to get through life without emotional consequence. And your entire community is experiencing a trauma. Kids aren't getting to be together at a really crucial developmental time. Teachers aren't being able to be together to get the support and energy and care of each other. Parents can't connect in the same kind of casual bumping against each other ways. And everybody's exhausted. This is an impossible time. So the more gentle you can be with yourself, the better. All that being said too, I can also add in the email I send some links to some amazing mindfulness meditations that are specifically, some of them are only 3 minutes. You could use those with your kiddos in your classes. But anything that's going to do that onboarding of skills that you can rely on. And as teachers, especially, if there's any way that you can practice those outside of the moment so that you can come back to it. Because I honestly don't know how you're doing what you're doing. I do not know how you're doing it.
I have just one random thing that I just thought of while we were talking about it. Ethan, my son's high school, one of their classes did, and I don't know, he can jump in if he has to. They did a unit or a assignment that each kid had to teach the class a task, but it had to be like a non-tech, like so teaching knitting or meditation, or so they each took turns like really like doing embodied task, even though it was on Zoom. It was like it got them to think outside of all of this. So that was it was a good thing. So I just thought of it.
Is there anything else that you just about focus or regulation or anything else that you want to bring up?
Well, Gina's going to talk.
Oh, I was just going to say that pets are a good thing too. Like we got a pandemic dog and he's just the right size. So that's a really good distraction to connecting with an animal and just petting it and doing nothing but focusing on that, on connecting with that creature, so to speak. I think I feel worried when I think about this generation of people, if they're lacking skills to connect with each other. It's frightening to me. Like I feel like I want to do everything I can to empower this generation of people to figure things out without having to have devices in their hands. And just in my work, I work with people younger than me, and I see it all the time. Like this, I had my headset on, I'm on a phone call, and this person just walks up to me and starts talking to me as if I'm not even on the phone or doing anything or in my own little world. And I made a point of going to him, separately and not scolding him, and said, oh, when you come in, why don't you just get my attention and let me know you want to talk to me or whatever. I was on a phone call. But that kind of unawareness to me is like something I see in people that are 25, 20 years younger than me, because they've just grown up with this, and it's really hard for them to read the room and the people. So I feel like I really want to do whatever I can to starting with little things. So,
and that's where, the smallest thing of even, saying, yeah, you're going to text all day, but I don't know, I'm sure you all have noticed this. People will say now, I've been talking with such and such all day long, and you'll say, talking? Well, no, I've been texting, right? But, getting the buy-in for even some sensory experiences, time with the dog, or a distanced hello with a friend through a car or something. Anything we can do to keep those muscles active in this time is going to be huge. I think we talked last time about the fact that social anxiety diagnoses were massively on the rise before the pandemic. And we know now that those are going to be even more pronounced. So anything we can do, like you're saying, Gina, to keep that ability to be in touch with our bodies and others' bodies as well is important. Well,
I had another one. So we just got news today. I don't know where Jackie's at with this, but I just got my little text that we're looking at the potential of going back in person. And I know that's still a big, huge if, and because we've had enough of those little comments. But so there's a slight potential that we could go back the end of this year. And if not, we're going to go back someday. Do you have any tips on what we can do to kind of prepare for reentry? You don't have to speak to that, but
no, yes, that's yes. And the biggest things that we can be doing are, again, making sure that all these quote unquote muscles aren't atrophied, and they are in many ways. Even just the way in which we have to do so much connecting and educating in our vocation online, that is, pushing that wiring away from the prefrontal cortex. So literally one of the most radical, here are a bunch of radical things that you all could do. Watch only one episode of a new series a week. I know, it's radical, I tell you. And have your kids only watch one episode of a new series a week. That is a radical thing anymore, right? But they have to wait for it, kind of like what we had to do in life, where we had to wait for something. With this new weird life at home, we don't wait for anything. If I'm in session with a client and I realize, oh, I'm out of toilet paper, I could probably order it during session, right? This is horrible. So another radical act is doing this, 10 minutes after dinner, everybody's just doing nothing. Our phones all sit on this table and you could find something fun to do for 10 minutes. Making sure that our kids are having some vocal interactions, you know, it's really easy for kiddos to hide out in class. I'm guessing that doesn't happen at IVA, but, you know, making sure that some of the time they call a grandparent, or literally, I know it sounds silly, but being able to have those conversations with people is huge right now. So enlisting people in your family and community to be willing to make a phone call or have a FaceTime or video chat with a kiddo. Another one is just really, this is the time, and I know, again, you all are exhausted. This is the last time you need new tasks. But this is the point at which we need to really be onboarding self-soothing skills, because our kiddos are going to be both dealing with walking away from so much screen time, which makes them anxious, and into social settings, which makes them anxious. So they're going to have a double whammy when the world reopens. So this is the time where we have to get super serious about teaching breathing, teaching how to handle awkward moments. As much as we can, those kinds of things are going to be really helpful. I hope that addresses at least some.
Yes, thank you.
One thing I guess that just came to me that was on a slide that I missed when we were talking is just that if we aren't creating opportunities for our children to focus and regulate, they aren't going to learn it. They just aren't. There's no natural opportunities anymore available to them, especially right now. You know, in-person school gave them an opportunity because it's just one person standing there talking. But that isn't the case anymore. And so, you know, it's up to us to create those opportunities. And then it's also up to us to create fiery opportunities for their little bodies and beings and brains. Because if we don't create those edgy, fiery opportunities, they will find those away from you online, and they are less likely to be healthy for them in that situation. So we want to offer both, you know, opportunities for focus and delay, but also opportunities for stimulation and healthy exploration and interest and things like that. So both are really important.
Hey, this is Cheryl. Thanks for being here tonight. Hey, I guess I'd just like to add that I'm, you know, although it's a stressful time because there's so much uncertainty, I'm really grateful for this time because, you know, I think our education system has needed to change and upgrade for a long time. But, you know, once that, you know, the train is rolling, it's hard to change tracks or, right? So it's needed, I think, to this huge, I don't know, diversion or pause or what it's not, you know, we're moving, so it's not a pause, but this time for us to really like do things differently. So I'm excited about this next time because I talk to teachers, and you know, before it'd be like, no, I have to teach in person. That's the only way to do it. And so I hope, you know, that people and parents and students have learned new skills of flexibility and, you know, what is the new time? So I guess I would rather not go into like, okay, we're going to go back to school at some point. I don't want to go back to like, let's make it the way it used to be. Instead, looking forward to like, how can we use this time and be better parents, be better teachers, be better, you know, and it's exciting to see like how can it be new? So I guess, you know, if you have any comments about that, and yeah, so that's my comment.
Yes, I love your comments. And so this book that I'm working on about re-entering life is called Begin Again. And it's just basically about like, how do we re-begin with some new wisdom in place? Because this has definitely been a time of gleaning wisdom. And I think it could be a time where we all use our collective energy to really make some neat changes that we've needed to make and realign some things that have needed to be realigned. So yeah, I think there's, just like there's post-traumatic stress, there's also post-traumatic growth. And I think we will grow and be stronger people as long as we navigate it well and do some really good intentional preparation. I popped my email address into the chat, and I'll include that in the email I send out as well. Is there any other question or anything to be addressed? In
Yeah,
Quakerland.
I've got a question. So as far as the research that you're aware of, what would you say is a sort of like an ideal day of tech versus no tech, online? Do they need, ideally need some time after school, just being offline? Or is there any kind of formula that you've seen that works best as far as balance?
Yeah, were you at our last session by any chance?
About half of it.
Okay, so I brought up an assessment tool, and that's kind of my best way of integrating the research and so I would encourage you to take a look at that part of that talk. But there is really no, right now, everything is so up in the air, and it's so dependent on the child and on the family constellation and on the school setting, but definitely children need a balance between attendance to all of their senses. And because screen-based stimulations really overstimulates visual and auditory only, there's probably, more need at this point and on from history in making sure that we create those kind of things, like you're saying, breaks after school, kind of like what Jackie was talking about, bio breaks that are reliable, like where we use the bathroom and drink some water and move our bodies. So it's more about the unique kind of setting within which the kiddos are growing up, but definitely lots of balance is needed. Okay, well, in Quakerland, they say, like, are all hearts clear, to see to see if everybody's gotten what they needed. So are all hearts clear?
And in the pandemic world, after all of our staff meetings, I like to say, okay, we figured it all out. There's nothing, we're okay now. Nothing's unclear and unknown. We're good.
I want to be on your staff.
We just figured it all out. All of us here in this group, done. Thank you so much, Doreen. I'm looking forward to the next meeting, which I think is, I should have this in front of me. I think it's the March 18th.
I think so too.
Is our third meeting. And can you tell us what that topic is?
Yeah, I think we had decided on how to moderate tech. So it'll be a lot about how to really actively get the buy-in and what kinds of things to have around to engage full bodies. And everybody can wear green because it'll be the day after St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I will I'll send everything to you, Jackie, within the next little bit.
Yeah, and then for everybody, I'm going to put it in the newsletter on Monday. I'll put the link to this recording and then all the resources that you're sending. We'll send it in the newsletter. Hey, good night, everybody. Have a wonderful night. Bye, Ella.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.